So this morning I'm going to show you a few articles. If you are not aware that Lithuania has now blocked railway transport to Kaliningrad from Russia. And you should understand that that has escalated the situation between the EU and Russia. But I'm going to start a little earlier. How did all this begin? You can go earlier than this, but I will go with this article by NPR. Oh, the irony here. NPR, a government-funded broadcast, telecast, and now online, U.S. government-funded. And this particular article does not seem to advance the U.S. government's narrative, shall we say. So this is Becky Sullivan. She says Russian military forces and Russian-backed separatists have invaded Ukraine. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says NATO allies condemn in strongest possible terms Russia's horrifying attack on Ukraine. With the invasion, a 30-year-old foreign policy debate has made a return to center stage. The question: should NATO, the mutual defense pact formed in the wake of World War II, that has long served to represent Western interests and counter Russia's influence in Europe, expand eastward? NATO's founding articles declare that any European country that is able to meet the alliance's criteria for its membership can join. This includes Ukraine. The U.S. and its allies in Europe have repeatedly said that they are committed to that open-door policy. But in the words of Russian President Vladimir Putin, NATO's eastward march represents decades of broken promises from the West to Moscow. You promised us in the 1990s that NATO would not move an inch to the east. You cheated us shamelessly, Putin said at a news conference in December. The U.S. says a ban on expansion was never on the table, but Russia insists that it was, and now Putin is demanding a permanent ban on Ukraine from joining the pact. Unsurprisingly, when you look at the evidence, what happened is somewhere in between, says Mary Surratt, a post-Cold War historian whose book about these negotiations, Not One Inch, America, Russia, and the Making of Post-Cold War Stalemate, was published last fall. So you hear she has a map here, joined before since 1992 in gray, and then joined since 1992 in blue. Now, Switzerland and Austria and some Balkan countries have not joined. And interestingly enough, Russia is in dark gray, and there is the little piece of land that Russia took from Poland, never gave back to Poland. Kaliningrad is what Russia calls it today. All right. What is the origin of Putin's not move an inch claim? For the first 4 decades of NATO's existence, the treaty represented U.S., Canada, America's closest allies in Western and Southern Europe. On the other side of the Iron Curtain were the Soviet Union and its allies in Central and Eastern Europe, including the former East Germany. But that long-standing divide was challenged in 1989 when anti-communist protests spread across Germany and other countries in Central and Eastern Europe. In the effort to reunify Germany, U.S. officials wrestled with the question of Soviet control from the East. What could entice Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to withdraw? The Americans guessed that maybe what Gorbachev wants in exchange for letting Germany unify is a promise that NATO would not expand eastward, Surratt says. And so, Secretary of State James Baker, in a speculative way in an early stage of negotiation, says to Gorbachev, How about this idea? How about you let your half of Germany go and we agree to move that one piece forward? But President George H.W. Bush rejected the idea, and when more formal negotiations began later in 1990, a ban on NATO expansion was never actually offered, Surratt says. There is some disagreement about what took place during the Baker-Gorbachev talks in February 1990. Some say that when Baker suggested that NATO shift not 1 inch to the east, he intended to refer only to East Germany, because neither side had begun to think about NATO expansion beyond that. Seemingly conflicting comments from U.S. officials and Gorbachev made years later do not help clear this up. Former U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice said as recently on Friday that nobody was even imagining Czechoslovakia or Poland or Hungary at the time. The historical record shows otherwise. According to Surratt, contemporaneous notes, letters, and speeches and interviews show that Western leaders were in fact already contemplating NATO enlargement by the time the February 1990 talks took place, she said. What is not in dispute, Gorbachev later agreed to withdraw from East Germany in exchange for financial concessions in a treaty that did not place limits on future expansion of NATO. But there's this residual bitterness afterwards. Still to this day, Putin is saying, look, there was this other offer on the table, right? Surratt says, and that's sort of factually accurate in a narrow sense, but it doesn't reflect the reality of the treaty. Now, as you know, that Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and that the NATO expansion question became more urgent, etc., etc. So you know what happened. All right, so fast forward to years later, and those of us who've been paying attention to world leaders and world events for a long, long time, when Boris Yeltsin literally appointed Vladimir Putin to be his successor, many knew that Vladimir Putin was not a Boris Yeltsin. Many of us knew right away he was a KGB officer and one time the head of the KGB. And later on, many of us found out that Vladimir Putin said that the breakup of the Soviet Union was a catastrophe. All you got to do is Google up these words. The breakup of the Soviet Union was a catastrophe. Okay? And you'll find it, he said it. Now, here he compares himself to Peter the Great to justify Ukraine war. He compared himself to Peter the Great long, long ago. Those of us old folks who've been keeping up with current events, with politicians, you know that he has always considered himself to be Peter the Great. Russian President Vladimir Putin has compared himself to Peter the Great, comparing his invasion of Ukraine to the Tsar's quest to reclaim Russian lands from neighboring countries. The Kremlin strongman 69 made the remarks Thursday while speaking at an event in St. Petersburg, his hometown built by Tsar Peter on land conquered from Sweden, celebrating the 350th anniversary of the ruler's birth. Peter the Great waged the Great Northern War for 21 years. It would seem that he was at war with Sweden. He took something from them. He did not take anything from them. He reclaimed what was Russia's. Just like Adolf Hitler reclaimed the Sudetenland. Putin said after visiting an exhibition dedicated to the revered autocratic modernizer. Putin went on to say that when Peter founded what would become Russia's cosmopolitan new capital city in 1703, No European state recognized that territory as Russian land, and everyone considered it to be Swedish land. He continued, the Slavs, together with the Finno-Ugric people, have always lived there. Moreover, this territory has been under the control of the Russian state. All right. Okay, I think that's enough of this particular article. And I can get rid of that one and that one. Now what I want to do is take you to this article that was posted 2 days ago. Kaliningrad sanctions to take effect, Lithuania says. Vilnius, June 18th, Lithuanian authorities said that a ban on the transit through their territories to the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad of goods that are subject to EU sanctions was to take effect from Saturday. And notice, EU sanctions. So this is Lithuania as a member of the EU. These are not NATO sanctions. This is not US sanctions. This is the EU sanctions. News came of the ban on Friday through a video posted by the region's governor Anton Elikanov. The EU sanctions list notably including coal, metals, construction materials, and advanced technology. And Elikanov said the ban would cover about 50% of items that Kaliningrad imports. The immediate start was confirmed by a cargo arm of Lithuania's state railway service in a letter to clients following clarification from the European Commission on the mechanism for applying the sanctions, urging citizens not to resort to panic buying. Of course, anytime you urge citizens not to resort to panic buying, what happens? They panic buy, of course. Elikanov said 2 vessels were already ferrying goods between Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg, and 7 more would be in service by the end of the year. So he's trying to say it's no big deal. Well, it is a big deal. It is a big deal. And of course, before that, let's see, was it before that? Why is this thing's Reuters is trying to push wow. Come on, Reuters. Stop playing with me. Alright, here we go. So this is posted today. EU's top diplomat calls Russia's blockade of Ukrainian grain a war crime. You see, we've got a lot of back and forth going on here. Russia is committing a war crime by blocking the export of millions of tons of Ukrainian grain, the European Union's foreign policy chief said on Monday, as the EU foreign ministers met to discuss ways to free up the crop and amid a global food crisis. If you guys are not preparing yourself now, listen, let me tell you something. Now, I live in a state where lots of grain is grown, lots of wheat. And there are people advertising on Facebook Marketplace $10 a bushel for the current crop of wheat. Right? It's not going to stay that way. I would buy more myself, but I don't have enough room. But I have my wheat. Each and every one of you should get yours too. This price of wheat is not going to remain $10 a bushel. It just isn't. They're predicting a food crisis, and I'm going to show you some articles that should make you pay attention, should make you think. Ukraine is one of the top wheat suppliers globally, but its shipments have stalled and more than 20 million tons of grain has been trapped in silos since Russia invaded the country in February and subsequently blocked its ports. So you see what the tit for tat that's going on. So Russia's blocked Ukrainian wheat from Europe, from Middle Eastern countries like Egypt, a lot of places where Ukraine has shipped their wheat to. And in many of these third world countries, it's going to cause mass starvation. Now, let's look at, once again, we're going to look at this map here. This is Russia. This is Latvia. This is Lithuania. And this little spot right here is Kaliningrad. Right? And this is what's having blockaded 50% of goods from Russia to Kaliningrad. And there's 1 million people that live in Kaliningrad. So, now let's go to the next article. Again, this morning, June 20th. EU needs to correct the blockade situation in Kaliningrad, says top Russian official. Or what? Let's continue to read. The EU must address the situation with the blockade of Kaliningrad, or Russia will be free to settle the transit issue by any means. You know what that means. The Russian official said. Now I want to point something out to you. I don't mean to be OCD about this. The EU must address the situation because the EU was the one who put these sanctions on. And in order for Lithuania to remain in the EU, Lithuania has to comply. But now Russia is threatening force by any means necessary. The EU must address the situation with the blockades of Kaliningrad, or Russia will be free to settle the transit issue by any means, according to the Russian chairman of the Council Commission. The European Union needs to correct the situation with the blockade of Kaliningrad, or Russia will have its hands free to solve the issue of transit by any means. Next to TV quoted Andrei Klimov, head of the Commission of the Council of the Federation of Russia of Defensive Sovereignty, as saying further. Konstantin Kasachev, a senior foreign policy expert and deputy head of Russia's Federal Council, posted on his Telegram channel overnight that the incipient blockade of Kaliningrad breaches international law. Kaliningrad is an enclave located between Lithuania and Poland. So you can go, and if you want to read this, read the rest of it. See what it says. Okay. Anyway, you see what's going on here, folks. Off to the next one. Oh, this is changing the subject a little bit. Matter of fact, speaking of crickets, let's go find this article. Here we go. World's biggest cricket farm to save the planet. So now there's a great big push to, as they say, make sustainable food by using crickets, by raising crickets. Now, I have seen some posts that's on Twitter that goes something like this: you will eat crickets, you will own nothing, and you will be happy. Cricket farming is still a young industry, but is quickly gaining in popularity. Blah, blah, blah. All right. I think I'm going to go look for that tweet. Yes. Okay, let's look at this particular tweet here. You will eat bugs, you will live in a pod, you will own nothing. This is the future that they have for you. Worms for dinner. Europe green lights insect-based food in a bid to promote meat-free protein. All right. Interesting, isn't it? And then let's look at this one on Quora. We'll look at a few of these. By 2030, we will all own nothing, live in pods, and eat bugs. World government wants 8 COVID vaccines from 2020 until 2025, then from 2025 until 2028. They want more vaccines for the new disease, which could be disease that affects only the COVID vaccinated, or from one that has more lethality than COVID, which of course one could make it a government lab. Probably other vaccines like the flu vaccine given similar to the COVID vaccine. Anyway, that kind of went on a tangent, so let's go look at the next one. COVID truthers' new freakout, being forced to eat bugs. Conspiracy theorists now think sustainability is the groundwork that elites will use to eventually micromanage the smallest aspects of our lives in the post-pandemic hellscape. As the COVID-19 pandemic started to ravage the world in earnest last spring, a new conspiracy theory known as the Great Reset slowly developed alongside it. Well, that's not a conspiracy theory. This came out of the mouth of all of the world's politicians' overlord, Klaus Schwab himself. The details of the theory vary from one conspiratorial echo chamber to the next, but it broadly holds that a vague, shadowy cabal of global elites either engineered the pandemic or are opportunistically using it as a means to destroy everything good in the world and build a post-crisis totalitarian dystopia in which average people live the united lives of slavery solely to serve the interests of the ruling class. The Great Reset has gained serious traction across the far right. No, actually, it's gained traction among the libertarians, but I digress. Especially in the wake of Joe Biden's election victory, as the nation struggled to respond to the third wave of the pandemic. As it is, its proponents have been increasingly consumed with a particularly bizarre notion that sinister elites want to force ordinary people to stop eating meat and instead subsist on a diet of bugs while they sip champagne, eat steaks, and laugh at us all. Well, that's exactly what's happening. If you've been keeping up with the news, the news has this great, you showed this great big, what was it, cricket farm in Ontario, I believe it was Ontario, and then another one, government-sponsored one in jolly old England. And they are talking about having the crickets replacing meat. How can it be a conspiracy theory when this is what they're actually saying outright, folks? Right here, world's biggest cricket farm to save the planet. We just read that the whole point of it is to replace meat. I will read, cricket farming is still a young industry but quickly gaining in popularity. The yearly production of this single farm would cover the daily protein needs of over 500,000 people. It would also save 160 trucks of feed, daily water consumption of 20 million people, and the greenhouse gases in. There you have it, folks. It's not a conspiracy theory. Equivalent to 520 trips around the earth when compared to meat. Why isn't cricket protein in every store yet? Sends us dealing with the two main obstacles that standing between cricket protein and the mainstream. The first one is that Western world is not used to edible insects, and the second is simply price. Oh, it costs a lot more. Interesting. Thankfully, people can change their minds about food just like they did with sushi and lobster in the past. Sens is adding cricket protein to bread, crackers, pasta, protein bars, and protein powder to offer familiar foods that look and taste great. This is already starting to improve how people perceive cricket protein. Overcoming the second obstacle is no less complex. Crickets can produce the same amount of protein as cattle using 2,000 times less water, 15 times less farmland, and 12 times less feed, while all producing 100 times fewer greenhouse gases. Is that true? No, it's a lie. It's a lie, and I'm going to prove it to you right now. What happened to my, there it is, right here. Now in this particular PDF file, okay, just making sure I know where I'm at here. Alright, I'm on the bottom of page 4. Let me show you something here. Effects of early life radiation exposure in crickets. What about it? All right, so we'll go back to page 4 and back to where I was. It was found that exposure to moderate doses of radiation in early development resulted in slower juvenile growth rate but increased survival in early adulthood, suggesting that self-maintenance was prioritized over growth. What you're saying is crickets and locusts can survive radiation from nuclear war? Despite the strong inhibitory effects of early life radiation on adult female body mass, age-specific fecundity was negatively impacted only at relatively high radiation doses. Well, you know, they could, say for example, they were to nuke Washington, San Francisco, you know, all the major cities in the United States. Well, the countryside would only get a moderate amount of radiation. Listen carefully. Crickets exposed to moderate radiation doses early in development laid larger eggs in adulthood relative to controls, and these eggs had greater hatching success. Do you people realize what will happen when there's a nuclear war? The growth, the expansion of locusts would be huge. That's what we're reading right here. If it was a moderate amount of radiation, early development laid larger eggs in adulthood relative to controls, and these eggs had greater hatching success. The locust population would explode, folks, if there is a nuclear exchange. Suggesting that radiation exposure has transgenerational effects on offspring performance. No noticeable effects of early life radiation exposure were detected on total non-enzymatic antioxidant capacity or hydrogen peroxide levels in adult females. Together, this research indicates that a single acute exposure, now we have acute exposure to ionizing radiation in early life, can affect phenotypic development in a complex dose-dependent manner, and that rather than being purely negative, phenotypic responses can be sustained or even enhanced. What? These people are looking at a nuclear exchange as beneficial? What the hell is going on here, folks? So it's true. They do want you to eat grasshoppers, own nothing, and be happy. If that's what it takes to create their one government world. But as I pointed out to you in previous videos, that's impossible. Iron does not mix with miry clay, as I pointed out to you in a previous video. Just like a man is not a woman, iron does not mix with miry clay. This world that we live in today cannot be a one government world. It's not possible. One could conclude with all this information is that they actually want a nuclear exchange. Now, as I've pointed out many times, I have proven over and over and over again for the last 7 years that the 77s of Daniel 9 is over. That means the time of the Gentiles has ended. And the dot on the end of that sentence will happen when they start launching nukes at each other. Daniel 9, verse 24, 77s are determined upon your people, that would be Israel, and upon your holy city, that would mean Jerusalem, to finish the transgression of Israel. But you see, the Gentiles, they don't want to finish the transgression of Israel. The Gentiles know that as long as Israel is not forgiven of sin, that the Gentiles can run roughshod over everybody, over Jerusalem, and live luxuriously in this world like the great whore, whom they follow. And to make an end of sin, to make an end of Israel's sin. Yes, the time will end, has already ended, but will end with an exclamation point. To make reconciliation, to appease. Time, 77s to appease Jehovah and bring back Israel, and to bring back long duration righteousness, and to seal up the vision and the prophecy, and to once again anoint the Kodesh, which is the holy place, the Temple Mount. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks. Well, a prince is a ruler, is a judge, a leader, a ruler, a prince. When Yehoshua was in Jerusalem, when he was in Judea, a man came up to him and said, "Master, I need you to judge between me and my brother since my dad has passed away." Judge about their inheritance. And Yehoshua says, "Man, who made me judge and ruler over you?" He disputed. Look, I'll show it to you. Who made me judge? I think that's how it pulls up. There it is right there. Luke 12 and verse 14. Not Jesus, it's Yehoshua. Man, who appointed me a judge? Who made me a judge over you to decide such things as that? He was not a judge. Therefore, he was not a prince. He was not a ruler. So the 7 sevens is the last part of the 77s. And proof of that, I'll go further. "7 weeks. Doesn't say and. Should be a period right here. It says 62 weeks or 62 weeks the street shall be built and the wall even in troublous times, and after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. Not after 62 and 7. It says after 62 weeks. 434 years from the day when Nehemiah came back from Jerusalem and proclaimed to the king of Persia that the street and the wall was finished. 434 years later, the Messiah was cut off. But that's not what your preacher said, because your preacher wants you to believe the false narrative of Cyril the Catholic. That false narrative being the enemy of righteousness, as they say, the Antichrist is Israel's Moshiach. So this already occurred 434 years from Nehemiah's announcement to the king of Persia that the street And the wall was built unto Messiah being cut off. The suffering servant, the non-ruler, the one who says, man, who made me ruler over you? And then there's that 1:7. The 7 years of destruction of Jerusalem by Titus. 3.5 years of siege, where Titus made a pact with his generals that they were going to just besiege the city, and they were going to take the temple piece by piece back to Rome to put it in their pantheon of, as the Romans would say, foreign gods that they defeated. But the Jews put up such a fight against the siege that Titus lost control over his men, and therefore this little covenant was broken. And Titus came back with only a menorah and some choice items, gold and silver, but the temple was destroyed. Not one stone on top of another. So that would mean that the 1/7 was also fulfilled. But there were 7 sevens that were not fulfilled. And that is, from the time of the call to rebuild Jerusalem, you see, Jerusalem was destroyed by the prince of the invaders, Titus. The call to rebuild Jerusalem occurred on June 7, 1967. I believe it was either June 7 or June 11, 1967. I have proven that to you so many times that maybe I'll go find it again. Shlomo Goren. Alright, there it is right here. Jewish Virtual Library. June 7, 1967. Right down here. Here's your call to rebuild Jerusalem. Lishana Hazat Be Yerushalayim Habnuya Be Yerushalayim Ha-Atika. Translation. This year in a rebuilt Jerusalem like the Jerusalem of old. That was the call to rebuild Jerusalem. I wonder, I want to look this up and see, just for out of curiosity. Sometimes I find some things out of just plain curiosity. Next year in Jerusalem. Okay, Lashana. Let's go. All right. I will need a Hebrew speaking man to figure this out. Okay, I'm going off on a tangent. What I'm telling you is this. That was the marker. That's when you begin counting 7 sevens, 49 years. 49 years later was 2016 on the Roman calendar. It was a year when a dark horse was elected in the United States, and as it turns out, his legacy will be the Abraham Accords. And as I pointed out in previous videos, in the eyes of mainstream Christianity, especially evangelicals, etc., that would mean that Donald Trump is their Antichrist. But of course, Christians love to change narratives when they feel is necessary. The truth never changes. The whole the proof of their narrative was it was complete nonsense concerning the man who brings peace between Israel and the Arabs somehow being the Antichrist. It is the most ridiculous notion, just ridiculous. But what I'm saying to you is that ended sin for Israel. That ended the 77s has ended. And what that has done, it has finished the transgression on Israel and Jerusalem. It puts an end to sin on Israel and Jerusalem. And it's time for reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting or future long righteousness, and to seal up the vision and to anoint the Kodesh Kodesh. It is time now. But no man knows the day nor the hour. But it is written that if you would have known, the good man of the house would have known what watch the thief was coming, he would have been ready. You don't know the day nor the hour, but you should know the watch. That's what he said. Are you looking around? Do you know even what a watch is? I think there was like 6 watches or something like that in old Roman times. 6 watches in a day? I could be wrong. I think it was one time 4, and then it became 6, but I think it's 6. Are you aware? Can't you tell by world events what's about to happen? They know that a nuclear exchange is going to cause locusts to populate exponentially. They're already planning on feeding you locusts. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a fact. You saw the evidence. So when people say, quoting, or I should say, not quoting, but reading the minds of their overlords, so to speak, you will eat crickets, you will own nothing, and you will be happy. We all know that people will not be happy at all. And people will savagely destroy their neighbors for whatever it is that they can pillage from them to get their steaks, to get their fried chicken, to get their fish, whatever sort of meat they can get a hold of. They will do it. They're not going to eat bugs and be happy. But folks, please use your brain and realize what's about to happen. Don't hide your head in the sand. The party's over. Even Vladimir Putin said so. He knew it.